The Livonia Chamber of Commerce welcomes you to the Italian American Club of Livonia for another joint event with our friends at the Westland Chamber of Commerce. I'm Dan West, President of Livonia Chamber, and we are honored to welcome Wayne County Sheriff and Detroit mayoral candidate Benny Napoleon.
Good morning. I understand it is morning, so I will keep my comments very brief for all of you. I'm Brooke Allen-Swope. I'm from the Westland Chamber, and we are just happy to partner again with the Livonia Chamber, and Dan and his wonderful staff. They do a great job. And of course, thank you very much, Sheriff Napoleon, for being here today. So thank you.
I would like to acknowledge our presenting sponsors for this event, two sponsors that have been very supportive to us through the years, Parkside Credit Union and Cambridge Property and Casualty. Thank you to both our sponsors for supporting this event. All right, now it's time to meet our featured speaker this morning. Wayne County Sheriff Benny N. Napoleon is a lifelong Detroit resident and a product of the Detroit public school system. After graduating from Cass Tech High School in 1975, he began training to become a Detroit police officer, starting a 26-year career with the department. He earned an associate's degree in law enforcement and a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Mercy College of Detroit, and he earned his law degree from the Michigan State University College of Law. He also completed numerous other prestigious law enforcement and government management training programs. He earned numerous promotions throughout his tenure at the DPD, including his final 3 years at the department as Detroit's police chief. After a brief retirement, Sheriff Napoleon was named Assistant Wayne County Executive in 2004, job he held until his appointment as Wayne County Sheriff in June of 2009. He retained that position in 2010 when he was elected sheriff. He announced this spring his plans to run for mayor of the city of Detroit, a position that is up for election this year. Sheriff Napoleon is here today to talk about his work throughout the county and his vision for Detroit and the region, if he's elected mayor of Detroit. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Wayne County Sheriff Benny Napoleon.
Well, good morning. Good morning. I'd like to thank Dan and Brooke and the Westland and Livonia Chambers of Commerce for allowing me to be here this morning. I am truly honored to have this opportunity. I thought Dan was going to say I came and announced that I was running for mayor of Livonia. That's a joke, folks. I was told that I could take as long as I want to speak this morning, as long as I'm done in about 20 minutes. So I promise to try to stick to the rules. One of the things that I always try to do before I give remarks is to try to say something memorable, because quite frankly, I've listened to so many speeches and I've been to so many speeches that I try to always leave folks with something that they can take away from my remarks and say, okay, I at least remember that. So I just reminded when I was on the way here, I thought about these 4 police officers who worked for me. And they had been working this real tough case, and they worked it for several months. And finally they finished the case, and took it to court, and it was all over with, and they were finally had a little break. So one of the guys says, you know guys, we've been working really hard, so we need to go someplace and relax. So why don't we all just go take a fishing trip? So before the guys go, they get out in the boat in the middle of the lake, and while they're out there, the guy that recommended the fishing trip said, you know guys, I needed to get you out here because I had some things that were heavy on my mind, and I just have some things that have been bothering me, and I just have to get it off, and I have to tell this secret. But if I do tell you this, everybody here has to say something that they just never told anybody before. So they all looked at each other and said, okay, we'll agree to that. We're in the middle of the lake. So the first guy says, you know guys, I have a serious drinking problem, and I keep a little flask in my desk, and every time I get a little nervous, I have to take a little nip, but I never get drunk at work. So I said, wow, man, that's pretty serious. So the second guy says, well, if you can tell that, I can tell my story. He says, you know, I have a gambling problem, and when I get a little short of cash, I go in the evidence room and I take a couple of dollars, but I always put it back. I said, wow, man, you're going to tell that story? The third guy says, yeah, I guess I can tell my story, the third guy says, hey guys, I got something real secret. I got a big secret. You know, I've been dating the sheriff's girlfriend for the last year. They're like, oh my God, man, how could you do something like this? So finally, the fourth guy, they're looking at him, okay, what's your secret? He's like, no, I'm not telling lies. And they look at him and says, you better say something. We thought, no, I can't tell you that. So finally said, if you don't tell us what your secret is, we're gonna throw you off this boat. And he says, well, my secret is that I can't keep a secret, and I can't wait to get back and tell them. So, if you remember nothing else from what I say today, just be careful who you confess to. That's what the police will always take. Confession is not always good for the soul. Okay? So I've been asked to talk to you this morning very briefly about regionalism. And one of the things that about regionalism that is, I think, so compelling is the residents get it. We cross lines every single day to do all sorts of activities. We cross from city to city and county to county to go to restaurants, to go to work. We cross to go to entertainment and sports, and we take our children. My grandson, who is 6 years old, he comes out, quite frankly, to Livonia and plays soccer. He also plays basketball at the Y out in this community now, and he lives in the city of Detroit. So we get it as residents. We do not let borders get in the way of what we do on a daily basis. We have, quite frankly, with the internet and with technology, we have become a global society. We talk to people around the world on a moment's notice. It's just an incredible thing when you think about it. People have created and hold friendships with folks in different parts of the world as they're playing games that I know nothing about because I don't know how to do any of that technology stuff with the proficiency. But I have a brother who plays some little word game, and he plays with people all over the world. And it's like, what are you doing? It's like a decent hour here, but the person you're playing with, it must be 5 o'clock in the morning. They have nothing else to do in that part of the world, huh? But people do that. So, you know, we have become global, but governments have been slow to move. And they haven't really embraced the concept of regionalism beyond the rhetoric that we have. I mean, we talk among each other. I go up to the policy conference in Mackinac, have been for the last several years, and often I leave there saying that this is like Groundhog's Day. We go up, we see the same people, and we have the same discussions. We come back, and quite frankly, not very much has changed. Why? Because quite frankly, we have turf wars. We are very parochial in our thinking, and slowly that seems to be changing with the Regional Transit Authority, which is really so important. You see improvements that are going on at Cobo, something that was needed, but we really have to do a lot more, and we have to do it quickly. As a resident of the city of Detroit, a lifelong resident of the city of Detroit, I've seen this great city go from what it was, which was a beacon of hope, a beacon of industry, a beacon of capitalism, a beacon for the world to look at. When I was growing up as a child and factories were humming, and you know, folks I know would get a job in a plant, work at 6, 7 months, quit, spend all the money they saved up, get another job, save up some more money, quit, get another job, and they could literally do that because we had that kind of economic activity going on in our great community. We don't see that opportunity anymore. And one of the things that we need to recognize that as governments, until we embrace each other, this region is not going to grow. You cannot have a strong Detroit and weak suburbs. You cannot have strong suburbs and a weak central city. It's just not going to work. We have to strengthen the entire region. But how do we do it? It becomes a very serious and sensitive discussion when we get to the table as people with varying backgrounds, both economically, ethnically, and culturally. We seem to not be able to get at the table and talk about things in a meaningful way because we let so many other issues or differences distract us from what really needs to be a common mission. And I understand the sensitivity of folks who may not be Detroiters, having been a lifelong Detroiter. I can see, if I always, as a lawyer, I try to see both sides of the story. Ask myself, can I make a case for the opposite side? If I'm on one side, I want to find out what the other side is thinking. And I understand that case. When you look at some of the things that have occurred in our city, when you look at some of the corruption that has been very blatant and straightforward, we know that we have some issues in that respect. It's very difficult for folks to want to trust that we will come to the table as equal partners and people that will want to come and do things in a manner that is acceptable to the region. So I recognize how difficult that must be, but we're starting out with regional transportation. That's important because we know, and it's been proven unequivocally, and I don't think there's much disagreement, that when you have regional transportation and when you embrace regional transportation, it creates an economic hemisphere. It creates economic activity along those routes that are good for everybody along the route. I don't care what city you happen to be in or what city it goes through. Now I can tell you, I have never really had the opportunity to be in a place where they had significant regional transportation. But I was studying in Boston last year, and while I was in Boston, I had a car, and I figured, I'm like from Detroit, you got to have a car. I mean, you don't have a car, you feel like you're lost. So I took a car to Boston. Well, first it cost me, where I was staying, it cost me $30 a day just to park it. Then every time I moved it from point A to point B, it cost me another $40 or $50 to park it. Till it finally hit me that's like, 3 weeks of this, I'm not going to be able to eat while I'm here in Boston. So I parked the car, and I did something that I had never done before. I started using public transportation. And I hadn't done that since I was a high school student catching the bus to Cass Tech. But I started jumping on the bus line. I used the cab, or I got on the subway. And it was pretty interesting as I got accustomed to it. And it was really a lot easier. I get to my destination, I get off the train, and I walk into wherever I'm going. When I finish, I get back on the train. I don't have to worry about driving. I don't have to worry about stopping at lights. I don't have to worry about people blowing horns at me and cursing at me and all that good stuff. So, I mean, I got to think, this is not really a bad way to get around in a community. But we have to change the paradigm. Here in the Detroit regional area, I will assure you, probably without exception, everybody here just about did what I did. We got up this morning, got ready to come to this location. Your car was either parked in your garage or in your driveway, or it was parked in a parking space in your apartment. You just got out, got in your car, drove here, parked right outside, and you walked in. Convenient, right? That's just the way we're used to doing things. That's the way we think. We're not used to doing what other people do in other parts of the country where they have mass transit. Get up, walk 2 or 3 blocks, get on a train. It takes you down to wherever you're going, get off the train, walk another 2 or 3 blocks. We're not used to that. So we're also going to have to change our whole thought process about how we expect to travel if, in fact, we're going to have regional transportation and it's going to be utilized. And quite frankly, that's one of the reasons I think we've been unsuccessful in doing it, because the people who are going to be relied upon to get this done, quite frankly, are the people who really don't need it. The communities that would be relied upon to fund it and to get it out there, most of the people that are going to use this are not living in those particular communities. So it becomes a real serious economic issue. So now let's talk about public safety. There is no question in my mind, no offense, Chief, that Wayne County and most of the region in Southeast Michigan does something that most communities across this country don't. Wayne County is unique in that we have 43 cities, townships, and villages, and every single one of them has its own police department, its own police station. We do share dispatching in some areas. We do have mutual aid agreements, but for the most part, we have our own police agencies. And I haven't talked to one mayor, city manager, township supervisor, or any person who's in charge of the executive who wants to give up their police agency. We have communities in this county that are hurting. We have communities that have lost more than 60, 70% of their police departments. Some communities, and I believe Livonia is one of them, if I'm mistaken, then someone please correct me, but I think the citizens of Livonia passed a special millage to keep their police department up to staffing, because they want to have their own police agency. Well, guess what, folks? I agree with you, because I believe that policing is a local function, and it's not popular, and it is expensive. But I just fundamentally, I'm not, since sheriff, folks have said, aren't you going to try to get, consolidate these city agencies and all these police departments under the sheriff's office? I've not had that discussion, at least I've never initiated that discussion with anybody. Because of all the functions that government does, I just fundamentally believe that policing is the one function that is so near and dear to folks in their community that they not only want to, but should have control over the level of staffing that you have, the quality of people that you bring in, who your leadership is when they're doing that very sensitive job of policing in your community. I think that you should want to know who your police chief is. You should want to know who the officers are that are policing your community, if you have the luxury of being able to afford it. But we're getting to the point now where many communities can't afford it. So what are they going to have to do? Like I said, I've talked to folks, I haven't done it yet, and I haven't initiated the conversation, but there's some communities that are hurting so bad and their citizens haven't raised their taxes to pay for the police department. But you think about it, when it comes down to fire, we can share that service, because quite frankly, you really don't care who that firefighter is. When my house is on fire, that's okay, whoever comes and puts it out, we don't care. EMS, if I'm fall out and I have a heart attack, I don't care what the paramedic, what city they came from, it doesn't matter. But when I'm driving through a community, and that guy in that scout car, that lady in that scout car pull me over and say, hey, you're doing 10 over, you want that to be somebody who's from the city that you're in, the city that you live in, and that's just how people are. I understand that. That's a very sensitive area when it comes to regionalism. Will it happen? I don't know. I think as long as cities can afford to have their own police departments here, they're going to do it unless they're forced to do something different. Fire and EMS, probably a great possibility that that might happen. So now let's talk about the elephant in the room. I'm not going to talk about all these other things, transportation and public safety, without talking about what is, quite frankly, one of the biggest issues from a regionalism standpoint in this area, and that's the Detroit Water and Sewage Department. The citizens of the city of Detroit are as parochial about water and sewage as most people are about their police departments in their cities. And that's why that's going to be a difficult task to voluntarily get the citizens of Detroit to regionalize the water and sewage department. In my discussions as I travel the city of Detroit, that is the one thing that every citizen group that I meet with, that's the one thing that they bring up. Are you going to regionalize Detroit water and sewer? And like I said, I can make a case for both sides. And I understand the argument about suburban communities, about the water rates and the corruption that they've seen in the water department and all the issues that we've had there. I'm very in tune to some of the corruption aspect, because we had a big investigation when I was the chief of the Detroit Police Department into the water department. But the flip side of that is Detroiters believe very strongly that the water and sewage department is an asset that they've invested in heavily, and that it's an asset that they believe should be under the control of the residents of the city of Detroit. And quite frankly, they're going to resist it anytime you bring it up. I don't think you'll ever get a consensus among Detroiters that the water and sewage department should be regionalized. So, how do we get it done? For the most part, it's an economic issue. And I believe we get to true regionalism when the economic circumstances dictate that we have to get there. Until such time as that happens, I think we will continue to see people want to be independent. They will continue to want to be autonomous. They're going to want to have control over those issues that impact their daily lives until it becomes an economic necessity. Now, should we continue to have the discussion? Absolutely. Because I do believe that at some point in time, as we grow and mature and as we shrink via technology and as a community, and as we continue to cross as citizens across city, county, and quite frankly, multiple county lines, then you will have a Southeast Michigan that is truly regional. But it's going to be based upon economics before it's going to be based upon anything else. A lot of folks say it's race. It's not race. It's economics. Because we have some very affluent communities that feel they're going to be carrying some of the communities that are not as affluent. And that's really what it comes down to, dollars and cents in the bottom line. So with that, I'd like to say that's my perspective on it. That's an honest assessment of where I think we are from a regional standpoint. And if you have questions, I will be happy to answer them. I do have the police here with me.
Sheriff Napoleon, it's always a pleasure to hear you speak. My question actually is about something you didn't speak about today. Recently, Governor Snyder was going to pass, or I think a lot of people were hopeful that he would pass the laws expanding the CCW abilities and being able to take them into more places and stuff like that. I just sort of want to know, what are your thoughts on the subject, and do you feel that increased gun carrying would provide for a safer community?
You know, I am probably one of the few people in law enforcement who is really neutral on that issue, and I'm honestly neutral. I own 2 guns, and they were both given to me, one by the sheriff's office and one by the police department in Detroit. So I don't really have a fascination with firearms by any stretch of the imagination, but I was opposed to the general carry when they first came out. But what we have found in law enforcement, quite honestly, is that the people who carry guns legitimately are not our problem. And even though I was concerned that as more people carried guns, we were going to have more and more conflicts, and that hasn't, and from my perspective, that hasn't happened. So I'm not opposed to any expansion of the CPL laws that would allow people to carry them in more places. There's some places where I'd be a little concerned about it, mostly schools and churches. But again, I'm not really, I don't really have a strong feeling on it one way or the other. I don't think it'll be the problem that I originally thought it would be. Is that it? Yes, ma'am.
Why do you want to be mayor of Detroit when there is an emergency in Detroit?
Because at the end of the day, let me step back. I was in Boston last year, and I was at leadership training at Harvard. And they brought in a young man who stood in front of a tank in Tiananmen Square, and he talked to us at length about the challenges he had in China, trying to change and move that government in a direction of democracy. He also had a young lady who came in and spoke to us about clean water and how she had stood up to some very large corporate folks to get clean water in her community. They also brought in a gentleman who had worked in the Kennedy administration and who had worked through the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Bay of Pigs and a lot of other serious issues that we were having in the 60s when I was a very young child. I was born, but I was a very young child. And as we went through and talked about true leadership and what it's going to change, what it's going to have to change the world, I really felt that, in spite of people who think I've done a lot of things over the course of my career, it kind of shrank to insignificant. Detroit is in a serious, serious crisis, folks, and anyone who does not believe that is not really facing reality. At the end of the day, when the emergency manager leaves, the city of Detroit needs leadership that is strong and supportive, leadership that is embracive of folks beyond the borders of the city of Detroit. As the sheriff, I've had an opportunity to meet folks throughout Wayne County, throughout Oakland and Macomb and Washington. I believe that it's important that Detroit has relationships beyond its borders. I believe that it's important that folks outside of Detroit have a relationship with folks in the city of Detroit, and I believe I'm equipped to do that. But one of the most important things that I think the city of Detroit needs from leadership is leadership that has character, leadership that has integrity, and leadership that, quite frankly, is not going to prison. I put too many people in jail. I'm not going to jail. So you can trust that you have leadership that is honest. I will make mistakes, as people make mistakes in government. But what I won't do is do anything that's going to put my freedom in jeopardy. I put people in jail. I don't plan on going. Chief, and then this young man. Yes, sir.
Just to kind of dovetail biggest hurdles that any mayor seems to have to deal with is the city council. And you are a very dynamic person, and if there's anyone that has the ability to get over those hurdles and those fences, it's probably you. But with all of this that's going on in Detroit, emergency manager, you have a election for mayor, and a city council that is, I think, at times dysfunctional at best. How are you coping with that?
You know, I was a salesman when I was in high school. And one of the things that I learned how to do as a salesperson is convince people what's good for them. So one of the things that you need in leadership is someone who can, I think the mayor of the city of Detroit has to have a certain amount of humility in him and be willing to grab a cup of coffee, a bottle of water, whatever it is they happen to drink in the morning, as long as it's not liquor, and go up to the council floor and sit in the room and say, look, here's what we're faced with. Give me a few minutes of your time. What are your thoughts on this? And then get a consensus. You're not going to get 9 people, but you may get the 6 or the 5 you need, and then you take away some of the displeasure that they have. And that's really the way I believe in doing things. If you talk to people and give them some buy-in, it's like anything else from a leadership standpoint. You're the boss. You want folks to buy into your vision, right? You've got to talk to them. You know, I think I'm a pretty smart guy, but I don't know everything, and I realize I don't know everything. There are people who come to the table with different life experiences, and I think we should value them. And with counsel, I think if you give them the opportunity to buy into what it is and have some participation, I think as a leader, then you will have a better time with them, and you won't see it be so contentious. Sir?
Do you have any comments in regards to the current status of the new jail?
Oh, yeah, what do you want to know about it?
I didn't hear the
I've seen
question.
in the news that there's been issues with over budgeting, potential issues with construction.
Let me say what I've said all along. And it's the truth, and if anybody can refute it, I want them to prove it to me. I was never consulted in the beginning about anything related to the bonding. I was not consulted when it came to any of the major issues concerning the budget for the jail. I am the gatekeeper. They give me the key and I run the jail. All of that was done out of the CEO's office. The jail that they promised to build me, they are not building now. And they made some monumental screw-ups. And the screw-up basically came, I think, when I believe the initial plan was to bond for X amount of dollars, knowing that that wasn't all you needed, and then you go back and get the rest of it. Well, when you went back to get the rest of it, the county commission said, we ain't giving it to you. So guess what? Now you can't build what it is you intended to build. The other side of it is, during the discussions on the construction and the size of the jail, the city of Detroit was in negotiations with the county, and I believe the county depended upon the city of Detroit leasing an X number of beds from the county jail, which they did not do. They could never get that deal done, which is another reason why there's a shortfall. So are they over budget? That's my understanding. I'm not a part of that discussion. Is it the jail that they promised me they were going to build? No. We traveled around the country. I visited 3 jails myself. And the issues that we have, and we've been very candid when it comes to the building. Building the new jail was something that they were trying to do for the longest. As it was indicated, I was assistant Wayne County executive. Egos have gotten in the way of doing business in a very practical manner in this county. The original intent was to build a regional justice center where you would combine the prosecutor, the courts, and the sheriff. They could never get those folks all at the table, talk about regionalism, to build the regional justice center. They couldn't get them there. So when I was appointed sheriff, the county executive asked me, well, Benny, would you build a jail? Consolidate your 3 jails. I won't have 3 laundries, 3 kitchens, 3 registries, 3 security operations, and so on and so on and so on. It cuts down dramatically on the number of people that I need to run the operation. The other thing that it does is we've gone from a jail that would require corner stations, which means you're going to have 3 or 4 people watching 64 prisoners, to direct supervision, where we now would have one person watching 64 prisoners on the day shift and the afternoon shift, and on the midnight shift you'd have one person watching 128 prisoners. So had the jail been built in the way that it was, well, I was told it was going to be built, we would have needed probably 300 less deputies to operate the jail. That's a significant savings to the taxpayers of Wayne County. That would have dropped my agency down by about 300 people, but it was the smart thing to do. It did not happen the way it was planned to happen. We haven't been able to get the prosecutor and the courts together to build that regional justice center, but I did what I thought was the best thing to do for the citizens of Wayne County, because it was supposed to save us as taxpayers $35 million a year. Building it the way it's being built now, you won't get those savings. Sir.
Can you talk about the dynamics of campaigning for mayor of Detroit at a time that there's an emergency manager?
You know, everybody talks about the emergency manager, and I know I'm among friends, but maybe not political party friends. I'm a Democrat, and the emergency manager legislation was pushed down the throats during a lame duck session after the residents of this state overwhelmingly said they did not want an emergency manager legislation. So fundamentally, I find that offensive. I find it personally offensive because, quite frankly, my grandparents were sharecroppers in a little town in Tennessee called Brownsville. And in 1965, after the Voting Rights Act, and my grandfather and grandmother registered to vote, they were kicked off their land and they were put in a place called Tent City. And when I asked my grandfather why he was living in a tent when we went to visit him that year, he said that they were living in a tent because they registered to vote. And that stuck with me. I've not missed an election as a voter since the day I turned 18. Check the record. I go to the polls and I vote every single time the polls open. So when someone wants to impose their will over the will of the people, I take great offense to that. And so I can't support the emergency manager legislation. Yes, we need changes in the city of Detroit. Yes, there are some issues there. Yes, people have disappointed us. But I don't think in a democracy that that's the way to do it. I quote Thomas Jefferson, a great American and framer of the Constitution, that if, and I'm paraphrasing, he says that he can think of no better place to vest the power of government than in the people. When the people exercise that power unwisely, the remedy is not to take that power from them. The remedy is to educate them. The government has taken that power from us as Detroiters, and I don't think that's the wise thing to do. So campaigning during the course of an emergency manager is difficult. I believe it's illegal, I believe it's unconstitutional, and I'm hopeful that the federal court will say so. At the end of the day, though, I recognize that as Detroiters, we're going to have to rally. If in fact the manager's taken away, we're going to have to rally and do things different. That's where true leadership comes in. Leadership that recognizes that we can't do business the way it's been done. We definitely can't engage in corruption and wasting the taxpayers' dollars when it comes to paying too much for contracts and things that we see that have gone on. I don't get involved in contracting in my agency. I just don't. My thing is, my tether contract was a huge contract. When I became sheriff, we had one tether contractor. And everyone told me that we were paying too much money for tethers. So when that contract expired, believe me, I was courted like I was the sweetheart of the prom. But I didn't fall for that. We put it out for bid, and we got 3 different tether contractors because they had competition. We wound up saving another $7 to $8 million a year when it came to that, because we had competition out there. That, to me, is the proper way to do business when you have a responsibility to take your taxpayers' dollars. I would be criticized for a lot of things, and I take that criticism head on. Dennis Neiman, who's a former newspaper person and now in my office, knows from day one when he came in, one of the things I tell people all the time, you will get me for whatever you get me for, but you won't get me for doing it and then get me for lying about it. You don't get me twice. So, you know, you have a right to know, and I see this lady from the press writing, and everything I'm saying, that's fine. I expect to see it in the paper tomorrow. I know it's coming, but that's just really the way government has to be open. It has to be transparent. But I do what I believe is in the best interest of the citizens of Wayne County. That's why I'm the sheriff. People complain about a lot of things I do. Oh, you're over budget, you're spending. There are 1,000 people in the jail that I have control over, which is 1,000 more than they budgeted me for. I got asked that question last night. So my response is, if somebody wants to put 1,000 murders, rapists, robbers, child molesters, and sex offenders, and all these other things back on the street to get me within budget, let them make that decision. Benny Napoleon's not going to do it. I'm not putting those people back on the street. Now somebody else is going to have to take responsibility for that. They're dangerous, they don't belong on the streets of Wayne County, and I'm not going to participate in putting them on the streets. That's not what we do. We put them in, we don't put them out. So that's the jail. Yes, sir.
So let's go back to regionalization in DWSD. I know it's unpopular in the city of Detroit to consider DWSD being regionalized, just as it's popular in the suburbs that since we're the largest customer base, we should have a greater share of the discussion. So there's really only three options here, right? Leave it the way it is, regionalize it locally, keeping it a public utility, or the emergency manager sells it to a private entity. If those are your three choices, which choice are you taking leadership on and saying that's the one we ought to be promoting?
I think at this point in time, I think that the emergency manager, if he stays there, will resolve that issue, and I think the issue is going to be more along the line of potentially selling it. The tough question is, I got to get elected in the city of Detroit, and I love you dearly, but the people who are going to elect me mayor of the city of Detroit don't want the water department sold.
But they should understand what the three choices are.
They do.
They should understand that a private sale is a likely option for the emergency manager.
And believe me, they do know that.
And that's not public employees, that's not public unions, it's a private company.
Believe me, they know it, but you know, sometimes folks are in denial. And quite honestly, those three things are on the table, and everybody knows it's on the table. I know it better than anybody. I believe that if the emergency management legislation is upheld, I believe the emergency manager came in for three real reasons. One is to break the union's contracts, two is to sell the city's assets, and three to deal with the long-term post-employee benefits. That's why the person's there. The governor couldn't do it, and the mayor couldn't do it. So I believe that that's why the person's there. Chapter 9 bankruptcy is ugly. But he has the wherewithal to threaten it to hopefully get some things done when it comes to dealing with our long-term debt. That stick the mayor and the governor don't have. That's why he's there. Yes, ma'am. Oh no, I'm not. I never said that. No, because I believe that again, it's a leadership issue, and I believe that. As we make, one of the things that we haven't done well in the city of Detroit, quite honestly, one of the reasons I believe we have a significant decline in population and businesses leaving the city of Detroit, I think people want to come to the city of Detroit. They want to live in the city of Detroit. But the overwhelming reason that people left and people will not come back is public safety. And until such time as we make the city a livable, walkable, sustainable place where people want to come and live, where people want to come and work. I was in the police department when we challenged Copyware to come downtown to Detroit. We had to go through hoop after hoop after hoop to convince the people at Copyware that Detroit downtown was safe. And that was their biggest issue. Folks did not want to come downtown because they didn't think they were going to be safe. We must affirm Detroit as a safe city. I have a daughter who lives with me now with a 6-year-old grandson, and she's looking for a house. I was telling that my daughter used to live in Westland, and she came back to Detroit temporarily, and she's looking for a home. I'm trying to convince her, my daughter, to move into the city of Detroit and buy a house. It's a difficult sale for her because of safety. So we have not done as much as we need to do to make this community safe. And that's one of the things that I am very, very intent on doing, is affirming Detroit as the safest big city in America. I believe we can do it with the right leadership, with the right technology, and the right commitment to public safety, one that I don't think we've had. And that's why I believe I'm going to be the best person for the job, because you'll be safe when you come downtown now. You're going to be safe when you come into our neighborhoods. I promise you that. I'm even going to get you to move back to the city of Detroit. That's my goal. Come on home. Oh, that's going to be my campaign slogan. Come on home. How's that? Yes, sir.
Question go with that, I guess, just to ask, is that the AOL had put something out the other day that said 5 of the top 25 roughest neighborhoods were in Detroit, and they were listing the different areas.
And my mother lives in the highest.
I've been in many of those places multiple times, so, you know, I know kind of the economics part of it, but what is it that you as the mayor, idea that you're thinking, and as the sheriff part of it, that you think?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. My mother lives in the most dangerous zip code in America. My mother. So no one is more in tune to the challenges that we have in that zip code than I am, because my mother's there every single day of the year. But by the same token, no one's more committed to making sure that that gets turned around than I am, because the people that I love and care about are in the city of Detroit. I have 4 sisters who live in the city. My daughter is there with me and my grandson. And my church is there. I have numerous cousins and aunts and uncles, nieces and nephews who are Detroiters. We need to have a plan where we believe that we will not tolerate. We have to create a climate of compliance. Livonia is one of the safest cities in America for a reason, other than you have a great police chief. But you have a commitment to public safety where you're saying that we're not going to allow certain things to happen in our community. We need leadership in Detroit that is going to make that same affirmation. We're not going to allow it to happen in our community. There has to be certainty of punishment. You have to believe you're going to get caught if you're doing something wrong. You need to believe that you have an adequate police force that will respond when there's a call for service that comes in. We haven't had that in years. I've been affiliated with the department for 38 years, and we probably have not had that kind of sense of security since probably the mid-early 70s, when we had 5,800 police officers. Now we're down to about 2,300, and the crime situation has not changed. We still have 1.5 million calls for service. We have over 100,000 Part 1 crimes. We have extreme demand on our investigative resources. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to police the city of Detroit, but there's a way it can be done. Using modern technology, using the resources that are available to us through APHIS and other places where we can track criminals. We can do it. I promise you we can do it. I know you can't vote for me, but you can come home. I want you to come home. Yes, sir.
One other quick question with that. I know that Chicago has a lot of camera systems set up. I know that Amber's working on quite a bit, Grand Rapids and stuff. That a lot of other larger cities are really starting to set up where they say it's more cost effective. Much better to have those camera systems, and is that something that Detroit might actually want to do on a little bit larger scale and get that set up to really help?
Oh, absolutely. I think that when I talked about technology, that's absolutely one critical portion of it. We have to have a camera system. Actually, I'm looking at drones. You're laughing, but I'm serious. I'm serious. We're looking at. There's some technology that's available. You know, we used to have helicopters. What's the difference between having a drone in the air and having a helicopter in the air? It's the same thing, right? Except there's not a person in it. There's just a camera looking instead of a person. I'm gonna catch some heat behind it, but okay, I've had heat before. But I'm serious. I'm actually looking at drones. I'm looking at cameras too. It's a good point. Somebody else had a hand up, I saw. Yes, sir.
So, talking about safety in Detroit, I guess that's what this table's topic is. But how would you deal with how would you deal with the separation in the homes and the abandoned homes in the city of Detroit? Because I know that I was just down in downtown Detroit. I was born and raised Southwest Detroit. You know what I mean? And I recently moved to Livonia. So believe me, I would love for the city of Detroit to be back to where it once was, but one thing that I noticed when I took a friend from out of town to downtown Detroit was downtown was beautiful. You know what I mean? You go downtown, especially the Renaissance Center and that area, it was fantastic. But then when you go to get on the highway, then you see all the tagged buildings and all the broken windows and abandoned buildings. So how would you deal with all of those areas as opposed to just the downtown?
You have to have livable, walkable, sustainable neighborhoods. You have to stabilize the neighborhoods that are reasonably stable. We have some neighborhoods in the city of Detroit that are jewels. They have homes that are exceptional. We have homes that you could not possibly replicate today because of the architecture and the woodwork and the wet plaster and things in them, and they're vacant. We need to make putting people in those homes a priority. We need to fix those homes up, put them on the internet, and there are people who need to come on home, and we're going to put them on the internet and say, look what you can buy in the city of Detroit for X amount of dollars. Now, today you may not want to do that, but if you believe it's safe, if you believe we have an education system that you can educate your children in, you will make that very difficult choice to take a chance on that house, because you can't lose on it. You picked it up at rock bottom. Detroit is like a stock that has gone down with nothing but ups. It's like when you could have bought Chrysler for $3 a share. I should have done that. Well, now's the time to buy these homes, because I'm telling you, Detroit is on the upswing. It's coming up. And if you really want to make that investment, we're going to put these homes on the internet after we fix them up and get people occupied and further stabilize those neighborhoods that are very stable at this point. The Indian Villages, the Palmer Woods, the Sherwood Forest, the Rosedale Parks, the Boston Edison, Indian Village, East English Village, places like that we're going to solidify and stabilize, and then we're going to grow out from there. With the abandoned homes, you got one choice. You either fix it up or tear it down. There can be no middle ground, and we have to make that a top priority. We should not have all this blight in our community. I have a plan, which is what I call the 1 square mile. It's kind of in-depth, and it's really too much to go into here. If you really want to know about it and how successful it is, about this time next year, after I've been the mayor of the city of Detroit, I'll come back and I'll explain it to you. That's a promise. I'm going to tell you how successful I was and how I did it. How's that? Okay, I got one last question. Since nobody else has a question, if you don't remember anything I said, what are you going to remember?
Don't confess to the police.
My man! Be careful who you confess to. Confession is not always good for the soul. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate you. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, let me just thank Sheriff Napoleon once again. So thank you for taking time out of your day to be with us this morning. And I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Parkside Credit Union and Cambridge Property and Casualty, and of course to all of you for joining us today. So enjoy the rest of the day and your Memorial Day weekend, and we'll see you soon.